Welcome to the 131st installment of Ear to the Ground, the Land Stewardship Project's audio podcast on family farming, sustainable agriculture, local food systems, and local democracy. I'm Brian DeVore, editor of the Land Stewardship Letter. In April 2013, the Land Stewardship Project helped launch an effort to raise public awareness about violations of farm worker rights on industrial livestock farms in Minnesota. The Minnesota Farmworker Justice Campaign is a joint effort of LSP, Central Campesino, and the Latino Economic Development Center. This campaign is an effort to not only draw attention to abuses on farms and to help document farm worker rights violations, but to point out that when a farm gets away with mistreating workers, it puts operations that are following the rules at a severe disadvantage, while giving an entire rural community a black eye. In a state like Minnesota, the violation of farm worker rights, particularly when the workers are new immigrants, remains by and large a hidden problem as far as the general public is concerned. Such violations can be the result of ignorance or arrogance on the part of employers, or a combination of the two. The groups involved with this campaign are also calling on the University of Minnesota and U of M Extension to dramatically increase their educational and research activities in the area of farm labor, as reports of wage theft and other abuses increase. After all, like many land-grant universities, the U of M has played a key role in promoting the development of the kind of large-scale industrial farms that often rely on large numbers of low-wage workers. It's time the U of M took responsibility as a public research and outreach institution and helped alleviate the problem of farm worker abuse. After a recent event launching the Minnesota Farmworker Justice Campaign, I talked to some of the people involved with this campaign about why this issue is so important. First, LSP organizer Doug Nopar described a particular incident he was aware of in southeast Minnesota that involved a farmer and a worker. He also summarized what the campaign would like to see done by the University of Minnesota and U of M Extension to help address this problem, and why this is so important for improving the quality of life in our communities.
A number of years ago, I was contacted by an advocate who was working with a farm worker who had his wages docked for backing into a barn door with a skid loader. He was $1,000 over a course of several months was deducted from his wages, and he wondered if that was lawful, and it is not. And I called his employer up, and I said, I heard this happen to one of your workers. That's against the law. You can't do that. And the owner said, I can do anything I want. If that was my son that backed into that door, I'd deduct $1,000 from his wages too. I can treat my workers any way I want. I've got my own personnel policy, he said. In fact, if somebody doesn't work for me for 6 months, I keep their last paycheck. It just spoke to sort of the arrogance that some of these large-scale farmers have, that they feel they're really above the law. So it's a real problem. The three initial things that we're looking for with this Minnesota Farmworker Justice Campaign, things we're looking for from the university are, one, for them to expand and improve their education of livestock farm owners who are employers. We want those employers knowing what the labor rights rules are. Secondly, we want the university, through their Latino financial literacy program, where they're already working with rural Latinos, we want them informing those Latino workers of their worker rights. So those are two requests for extension. And then from the university, from the colleges, we want them to work real closely with Central Campesino and the Latino Economic Development Center to actually do some research to document the extent of labor violations, worker labor incidences that are out there, so we've got a better handle on just how common these problems are. Yeah, when a farm is able to take advantage of its workforce, it operates at a lower cost, and so that puts other farms at a competitive disadvantage. Secondly, it makes wages around the whole area. It depresses wages for all workers in the community. If a large farm is able to get away with paying people less, that hurts people's wages in the whole area. And it also sets up a system where people don't trust one another. Workers don't trust their employers, and so they are suspicious. And it makes some immigrants more suspicious of long-time residents, and it's just not a healthy situation.
LSP and you have been kind of starting to talk to frankly, white rural residents a little bit about what kind of community do you want? Do you want to have one where there's a lot of mistrust and walls are built up, or do you want to have something different? I think that's an important piece to kind of show people that this is to your benefit to address these issues a little bit, and it's not just, oh, we're doing this out of the goodness of our hearts for these poor laborers type of thing.
Yeah, we're not really approaching this from a do-gooder approach. I mean, we need to look at this from self-interest. What kind of community do we want? Do we want to foster a community where immigrant children are able to get an education, move on to college, feel comfortable in the community enough to open a business? There's a lot of incredible attributes that the Latino community have in terms of entrepreneurial skills, vocational skills, civic participation, that if we can build trust between Anglos and Latinos in the rural Midwest, it's a lot of advantages for white people, and so that's something we want, as we're talking with our longtime, largely white members at LSP, we're kind of trying to look at this from both a historical perspective about how we came to this country as immigrants, how that's similar for today's immigrants, and what benefits there are for us in having a more egalitarian, respectful world.
Next, rural Southeast Minnesota resident Barb Nelson talked about how a local quote-unquote model farm was recently found guilty of wage theft, and how that reflects poorly on other farms in the community.
Well, personally, we were really surprised when one of the dairy farms in our area, held in really high regard by actually corporate agriculture and Chamber of Commerce especially, had chosen them to be family farm, not actually family farm of the year, but chose them to have the family night on the farm. And people tend to think these are really terrific farmers, must be doing everything right. And then it came out that they were wage thefting their employees. Probably both Anglo and Hispanic workers, and actually fought it for 5 years before they were forced to pay $85,000 fine. The whole neighborhood, the whole town was really, really surprised about it. Well, we've discussed it. I'm sure 8 out of 10 farmers treat their employees right, but the ones who don't put a black mark on all of them and are unfairly making more money, essentially making more money, and by avoiding paying the wages.
I then talked to Ernesto Viles Bustos, the executive director of Centro Campesino. Centro, which is based in Owatonna, Minnesota, works with farm workers throughout the region. And Ernesto says wage theft is a particularly vexing problem in the area.
One of the main cases, or one of the most prominent situations that we see, is definitely the situation where workers are not getting paid either the last week, or if they work for 3 days or 4 days at different farms or different places. For us, it looks like that's kind of like a very active and very common practice within this industry. Another one that is probably one of the probably top 2 is definitely the workers' compensation piece. We definitely see a lot of stories where workers are being, or they get injured, or they get some kind of accident, or even sometimes illnesses while working on certain farms, whether it goes from interacting directly with some kind of toxic chemical, some type of dust. We have heard, for example, workers that do in farms of chickens or turkey, where they're walking, where there's thousands of animals, and there's all this dust, and they don't have the right gear. We see a lot of people being injured at dairy farms, whether being kicked by a cow, being charged by the animals, or sometimes just they weren't given, for example, the proper boots to walk around the facility, and sometimes they slip and fall, and that's on them, not really on the employees. And with this goes attached to it goes that practice where people are being injured. Not only are they not being taken care of by the employers, but also are required or threatened to come back to work. Otherwise, they're going to be losing their jobs. So I think definitely the issue is bigger than what we hear and bigger than what we see, mostly because we know that a lot of these farms are very rural. They're very, secluded in a way. Farm workers in these places have schedules that run, from 6 in the morning to 7 in the afternoon. Places like Centro Campesino or Land Stewardship Project or LADC, if they contact us at that time of the hour, we'll probably, have to listen to voicemail the next day. And so, a lot of these cases that are coming forward with this collaboration of organizations is because it's those people who already kind of have the knowledge of who we are, what we do, and that they feel comfortable enough to come forward and say, this is what had happened, this is my situation. And I would actually say that that's a very, very small percentage of the workers who are, daily being affected by these issues.
I think it would surprise people that when people think about these issues, they say, well, that's something that maybe occurs in the border states, in California, Texas, or whatever. But it sounds like it's a growing and a big issue in a state like Minnesota.
Absolutely. I think, the concept of a farm worker has this kind of, I don't want to say stigma, but it has almost, a very specific image that has been perpetuated by either the market or the growers or, the system itself, where the first thing we think about, farm workers is either strawberry fields or orange groves. And so for Minnesota, a lot of people say, well, I didn't know there were farm workers in Minnesota. And that's kind of our, and, part of our battle is there too, to try to dismantling that belief that farm workers have to be on the field. A lot of the farm workers that we're dealing, given, provided the weather that we have here, are going to be sometimes in farms that they'll handle cattle or, chicken, turkey, some other stuff. But at the end of the day, the violations, the type of abuses that we see are, to the same extreme or to the same level that we will find in places like Florida and California.
So it sounds like we're in a situation right now where we need more reporting of of these violations, and then we, on the other side, we need more education of the employers themselves about what they should and should not be doing, and what the rights that these people have, because it seems like one of the situations is the workers themselves sometimes think they don't have these rights because maybe they're undocumented or whatever.
Yeah, definitely the status is one of the barriers that we have in terms of really pushing these issues a little bit further, and definitely the barriers that the employers put up for us creates a different environment of how these issues need to be addressed. One thing that I think it's important to understand is that a lot of these violations that are happening and that we see these incidents that need to be reported more often, that need to be documented in a different way. Also, there are those type of situations that they're not too complicated to understand that this is something wrong. I think that a lot of common sense and a lot of just everyday values and ethics would apply. I think that anyone would agree that if you work for someone for a day, you should get paid for your day's work.
Lisa Sass-Zargoza teaches a University of Minnesota class called Migrant Farm Workers, Family, Work, and Advocacy. She and her students participated in the campaign launch, and Lisa talked about how when people discuss reforming the food system, worker rights are often overlooked.
So it is true that oftentimes when we're talking about our food system, rarely do farm worker issues come up at all, much less as something that we really need to be paying attention to. And as the more I talk about this and the more I do this, oftentimes I feel like it's almost as though people as consumers of food were being duped. We go to the store, whether it's to the larger grocery stores or to the co-ops, but we still really don't understand where our food came from, how it was harvested, how it got there. And the fact that about 85% of our fruits and vegetables pass through the hands of farm workers, so oftentimes very few people realize and understand the depths to which farm worker rights are they are limited themselves, and that those rights that they do have are oftentimes either ignored or blatantly discounted or they're not held up in any way, shape, or form. And so the health situation of migrant farmers, average lifespan of a person in the United States is 77. Average farm worker lifespan is 49, for example. The average income of a farm worker is about $11,000. And we can go on and on in terms of education and all these things. And so that piece is so crucial, I think, to being part of a food system that is healthy and that is productive and that is dignified, and it is the food system that I think so many of us want. There's some people who intentionally know about it and really want and work towards that, and there's oftentimes just a lot of people who don't know, and I believe, like you were saying, would be aghast at the situation if folks would know. So the challenge then, of course, is to A, educate folks, and then B, to try to inspire action. Because once you know, then what do you do with that information?
Well, I would think you might be in a pretty good position to almost test out how this education to action process could work with students.
Yes, absolutely. The first time that I taught this class, migrant farm workers, the students at the end of the class said, well, what do we do now? And I said, well, what do you want to do now? And so they started a group called FAN, Farmworker Action Network. And for about 6 years, it was really quite active at the University of Minnesota. This was in the 90s. There was a fair amount there's a lot of organizing on campus at the time. The grape boycott was still going on, so the students this community action group got the university to stop serving grapes, for example. There was also Piccoon, farm workers out in Oregon were doing a national campaign against the veggie garden burger, and it took about 2.5 years, but they eventually got the university to switch over to and to honor that boycott and switch over to a different veggie burger. It is really an amazing opportunity and an amazing... I'm just honored to be able to be in that situation where not only do students, because of their work, the way I set up the classes, the students get connected to issues that are going on every single year. So the syllabus, the way the class runs changes every year according to what's happening, and they get sort of not only real life experiences, but oftentimes there's truly a desire to continue working with it. And I was just talking to one of the students who's here tonight, for example, who said, I know that we're doing this for a class, and I know the class ends at the end of the semester, but I really do want to stay involved, and I really want to figure out how to do that. And so it's a great opportunity. Sometimes it works for folks, and sometimes it doesn't, to continue on. But I do think that oftentimes I've had students come back and call me and say, I just had someone earlier this year that she's organizing workers down in Louisiana, for example, and she said, I was going to go to vet school, and I decided to do this instead because of the class, and thank you so much. And so it's also great for me to be able to work then with former students as colleagues in organizing, and that's happened through the years as well, which is great. Yeah, I think the challenge it's both challenge and opportunity is for those folks who are involved in the food movement, who to deepen that understanding and to have a vision which includes labor as a key piece to it, and for those who are involved more in the labor issues or maybe in some Latino-centric issues, to look to the food movement and to do that in a way where all those issues are connected and interconnected in the intimate way that they are, because too often times we get siloed. And so certainly for me, when I think about farm worker rights and thinking about the notion of framing that within the concept of producing and demanding a food system which is truly based on dignity and truly based on justice along the full chains of production, then indeed it can bring those two together. And it erases some of those silos.
One of the things that I know that seems like it complicates the issue even more is this all gets rolled into the issue of immigration. We talked about the immigration reform issue tonight. I guess, how do you see it? Is it something that makes it harder to bring about the change we want?
Sure, I think it's both a challenge and an opportunity, as most challenges are. I think there certainly is an assumption that there's a lot of folks who are in this country who do not have papers, and there certainly are folks who don't have papers, and that number is more than it was, say, 15 or 20 years ago who are working in this industry, at least in Minnesota. The demographics in Minnesota have changed significantly. What I think at the core level of, again, going back to a lack of information, lack of understanding within workers as well as within the larger public and within employers, is that many of the basic labor laws do not switch or do not change or are not impacted by one person's status. And so there's an assumption that, if you don't have papers, if you're here without documents, then you don't have any rights. And while those rights indeed are curtailed in some ways, some of the very basic labor laws indeed apply to everybody. That is important information, not only just important information, but an important information that needs to guide behaviors. That's a challenge and an opportunity in itself, certainly. And it also allows us to have a bigger discussion about who are we talking about, of what is our, who lives where we live, who are the people who produce our food. And if a person works, they should get paid for that. And it doesn't diminish the dignity of the work, and it doesn't diminish the respect that needs to be paid to people for working the work that they do. So challenges and opportunities. I also have seen, because of the demographic shift that we've had. I was recently at a Farm Bureau presentation at the University of Minnesota in the College of Agriculture, or in CFANS. This person, a very young woman who is now in charge of the policies, she was a policy analyst, or I can't remember exactly her title, and she brought forth the position of the Farm Bureau, which is in support of immigration reform. Now, she was also supportive of an enlarged guest worker program and other things that I think there's a better way we can do things. But the fact that she was making a presentation to all white students who were all rural farm, agricultural students, that I wouldn't have seen 5 and 10 years ago. And so the demographics themselves are demanding a change. And so how we do that, some of those transitions are going to be a little bit more gracefully and less gracefully. But I think that it's incumbent on us to certainly do our best and bring our best selves forward in all different arenas of this.
For more information on LSP's work related to farm worker rights and racial justice, see www.landstewardshipproject.org and check out the Racial Justice page under the About Us section. If you have comments or suggestions about this podcast, contact Brian DeVore at bdevore@landstewardshipproject.org, or you can call 612-722-6377. Thanks to Laura Borgendale, Western Minnesota musician, for Ear to the Ground's theme music. And a special thank you to all of Land Stewardship Project's members who make initiatives such as this podcast possible. If you're not a member, visit landstewardshipproject.org to learn how you can support LSP. Thanks for listening.